Her name was Vera Ashford, 28 years old. And for as long as she could remember, she'd been the family's quiet disappointment, the one they apologized for at dinner parties, the one who existed in the background of every Christmas card like a smudge someone forgot to wipe away. Her sister, Celeste, was different. Celeste was the kind of daughter parents composed speeches about. Yale undergraduate, Columbia Law. A future so bright their father, Harrison Ashford, practically wore sunglasses when he talked about her. The Ashfords were old Manhattan money, the kind whose family name appeared on the bronze plaques of libraries and cancer research wings. Harrison ran Ashford Realty Group, a commercial real estate empire worth $92 million that Vera's grandmother, Rosalind, had started from a single rented office in 1965. By 2024, it employed over 300 people and owned 43 commercial properties across the tri-state area. Vera had been born with dyslexia. Diagnosed at age 7. Letters would dissolve and reassemble on every page like restless water, turning a paragraph into a puzzle that cost her 3 times the effort it cost everyone else. Her parents' response wasn't patience. It wasn't accommodation. It was something closer to disappointment worn as concern. When Vera was 12, her mother, Diane, arranged violin lessons for Celeste at a private conservatory, SAT prep with a Columbia professor who charged $400 an hour, French immersion camps in Montreal. When Vera asked about tutoring for her reading, her mother tilted her head with an expression that looked like sympathy but felt like erasure. Vera, we've already spent so much trying to figure out what works for you. At some point, we have to be realistic about your strengths. She was 12. She believed her. So she adapted. Audiobooks became her lifeline. She developed her own system of visual maps and diagrams, webs of information that helped her grasp complex ideas in ways that traditional reading couldn't reach. And every Sunday, without fail, she took the crosstown bus to her grandmother Rosalind's apartment on the Upper West Side. Rosalind Ashford was in her late 70s then, a woman made of quiet steel and sharp humor. She'd sit with Vera for hours in the afternoon light, teaching her to understand things through story and structure rather than dense text. The world is built on systems, Vera, she'd say, spreading old documents across her kitchen table. You don't have to read every word to understand a machine. You just have to understand how the parts connect. She'd press her papery hand over Vera's and hold her gaze with those clear, knowing eyes. You see things others walk right past. That's not a weakness, sweetheart. That's something rare. Vera didn't fully understand. Not yet. First, she had to survive another decade of being the Ashford family's unspoken regret. Christmas 2018. 40 relatives in her parents' Upper East Side townhouse. Catered food, crystal stemware, the annual theater of Ashford family excellence. Harrison stood at the head of the mahogany table, wine glass raised, voice carrying the authority of a man who'd spent 40 years expecting rooms to go quiet for him. I have an announcement, he said. Celeste has been accepted to Columbia Law School on a full scholarship. The room erupted. Applause, raised glasses, Celeste blushing with practiced grace. Harrison's voice swelled. She will be the first Ashford in 3 generations to attend Columbia Law. This family's legacy is in extraordinary hands. More applause. Vera's uncle clapped Celeste on the shoulder. An aunt pressed both hands to her chest in theatrical joy. Then Harrison's gaze drifted down the length of the table. To Vera. His expression cooled like a window left open in November. And Vera, he said. A pause, just long enough to be deliberate. Vera is also here with us tonight. Laughter. Soft, uncertain, the kind people produce when they need to belong to a moment but don't know how. No one defended her. Not even Celeste, who smiled along like someone who decided silence was a form of neutrality. Vera stared at her plate. The lamb blurred through tears she refused to release. Beneath the table, a hand found hers. Paper-thin fingers. A familiar warmth. Rosalind, seated 2 chairs away, squeezed gently. When Vera looked up, her grandmother's eyes held something ferocious. Anger, yes, but aimed inward at her own family, at the son she'd raised who was sitting at the head of the table performing cruelty in front of 40 people who were all too comfortable to stop him. Rosalind didn't say anything. Not that night. But 3 months later, she called Vera to her apartment and said she needed to show her something important. And a year before that, the previous spring, she'd handed Vera a small wooden box. Dark walnut, brass fittings, the size of a thick hardcover book. "Keep this close," she'd said. "Don't open it yet. When the time comes, you'll know." Vera had taken it home and put it on her closet shelf and tried to forget the strange, heavy feeling of those words. March 2019. Rosalind's apartment. She was 82 by then, thinner than Vera remembered, her silver hair catching the afternoon light like frost on glass. But her eyes, those clear, measuring eyes, hadn't softened at all. "Sit down, sweetheart." Vera sat. She studied the walls. Photographs covered every inch. Rosalind breaking ground on her first Brooklyn property in 1965. Rosalind shaking hands with city officials. Rosalind accepting industry awards. Not a single photo of Harrison in any position of leadership. "I built that company with my hands," Rosalind said. "One office, one secretary, and 60 years of refusing to quit. Harrison inherited it. He didn't earn it. And because he didn't earn it, he doesn't understand what it actually means, what it cost." She leaned forward. "Your father measures people by their credentials, their performance, their ability to impress people in expensive rooms. I measure people differently." Her eyes sharpened. "You are the only person in this family who knows how to be genuinely kind to someone who can't give you anything in return." She pressed the walnut box deeper into Vera's hands. "There's something inside that will matter to you one day. But not yet. You're not ready. And neither is your father." Her grip tightened. "When he shows you exactly who he is, not in private, but in front of witnesses, so there's no ambiguity, you'll know what to do." Vera wanted to ask what was inside. She wanted to ask why her. She wanted to ask 100 things. But Rosalind changed the subject and began talking about the book she was reading, and the conversation drifted away like smoke. 18 months later, Rosalind was gone. Pancreatic cancer. Vera held her hand in the hospice, the only family member present at the end. The box stayed unopened on the shelf. April 2024. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Subject: Organizational restructuring. Confidential. Vera's position as administrative assistant at Ashford Realty Group would be eliminated effective July 1st. HR would reach out about severance. She read it 4 times before it settled. That evening, she stayed late in the copy room, sorting files nobody would ever open, when voices drifted through the wall from Harrison's corner office. Her father. Her mother. She pressed still. "We can't have her here when Celeste takes the leadership role," Harrison was saying. "It sends the wrong message. The CEO's sister running a copy machine." "People might ask questions," Diane offered. "Exactly. Why she isn't in management. Why we haven't advanced her. We'd have to explain." He paused. "Why she's the way she is." Diane's response came softly, almost tenderly. "We did everything we could, Harrison. Some children simply don't develop the way you hope. Which is why she needs to move on. We'll make the severance generous. She can find something suited to her." Vera stood with her palm flat against the wall. $42,000 a year. Her studio in Queens, shared with 2 roommates, cost $1,800 a month. No savings. No safety net. Lose this job and she'd be out of housing within 2 months. But the money wasn't what turned her cold. It was the recognition, settling through her bones like something inevitable, that if she accepted this, if she quietly took the check and disappeared, she would spend the rest of her life as proof of their verdict. Not because she'd failed. Because she'd never once been allowed to try. Celeste's graduation celebration was tomorrow night. Vera wondered what other announcements her father had already planned. May 15th, 2024. The grand ballroom of a midtown hotel whose name Vera had only ever seen in society columns. 350 guests. Business partners, white shoe attorneys, family members she hadn't spoken to in years. 12-piece orchestra. Crystal chandeliers. The kind of event Harrison Ashford staged not to celebrate his daughter but to confirm his own significance. Vera arrived in a black dress from a discount retailer, the nicest thing she owned, and her mother intercepted her near the entrance before she'd taken 20 steps. Diane's gaze moved from Vera's shoes to her hair to her earrings. Her lips formed a thin, controlled line. "You couldn't find anything more appropriate? This is what I have." Table 31. Near the service corridor. Try to stay out of photographs. She leaned close. Tonight belongs to Celeste. Whatever you're feeling, I need you to keep it invisible. Don't give anyone a reason to look at you. She walked away before Vera could respond. Table 31 was partially obscured by a decorative column. Vera's tablemates were distant cousins she'd met exactly twice. From her seat, she could see the stage clearly, an enormous projection of Celeste in her graduation regalia, a banner reading "Congratulations, Celeste Ashford, Columbia Law Class of 2024. And near the entrance, standing entirely alone, a man in a charcoal suit. Silver-haired. Mid-60s. Watching the room with the careful stillness of someone who'd spent a career in courtrooms. His eyes found Vera's across the crowded space. Something cold moved through her chest. At 8:30, the orchestra stopped. The lights shifted. Harrison took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, in the voice he reserved for moments he'd already rehearsed 100 times, "thank you for gathering tonight to honor a woman who represents everything this family was built to produce." The applause began before he finished the sentence. He catalogued Celeste's achievements, the honors, the clerkship, the firm, and his voice rose with each item like a man bidding at auction. Then he paused. He reached into his jacket pocket. "Tonight I'm not only celebrating her past. I'm announcing her future." Celeste joined him on stage in a silk gown, luminous. "Upon my retirement, Celeste Ashford will assume the role of CEO of Ashford Realty Group. And as her inheritance, she will receive our family residence on Park Avenue, currently valued at $14 million, and full title to my estate." Standing ovation. Camera flashes like a storm. The cousin beside Vera leaned over. "So what does all of this mean for you?" Vera opened her mouth, closed it. What could she possibly say? And then the silver-haired man from the doorway was walking toward her. Slowly, deliberately, like someone who had always known exactly when he would arrive. He stopped at her table. "Miss Ashford." His voice was low, measured. "My name is Thomas Whitby. I was your grandmother's attorney." He withdrew an envelope from his jacket, heavy cream stock, sealed in burgundy wax bearing a notary's stamp, and set it on the table in front of her. Vera stared at it. "She left this for you, with very specific instructions about when it should be delivered." His eyes moved briefly toward the stage. "I believe that moment just occurred." Her fingers trembled as she touched the envelope. "What's in it?" He studied her for one careful moment. "Her will. The genuine one. The document your father has never seen." He produced a business card. "I'll be available when you have questions. And Miss Ashford, she asked me to tell you something." He straightened his cuffs. She said, "Give this to Vera when Harrison finally shows her exactly who he is. By then, she'll be ready." He walked away into the crowd and didn't look back. Vera couldn't breathe inside that ballroom. She pushed through the nearest service door, found a corridor near the kitchen. Fluorescent hum. The celebration muffled to something distant. Her hands shook as she broke the seal. 3 pages. Dense legal language. A notary's stamp. A date, September 14, 2019. She read slowly. Forced the letters to hold still. Made each sentence give up its meaning. I, Rosalind Catherine Ashford, being of sound and capable mind, do hereby revoke all prior testamentary documents and declare this my final will and testament. Halfway down the first page, her eyes caught on a paragraph. To my granddaughter, Vera Louise Ashford, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Ashford Realty Group LLC, currently valued at approximately $47 million, along with all associated voting rights. She read it again and again. The will continued. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Harrison's treatment of Vera throughout her life. She has been excluded from opportunity, belittled in front of family and colleagues, and denied resources and encouragement, not because she lacks capability, but because she was never given the conditions to develop it. Vera is not inadequate. Vera was failed. And I will not allow her father's failures to define her after I am gone. A sound escaped Vera's throat, something between a sob and a breath she'd been holding for 20 years. Her grandmother had seen. She had seen everything. The will included a clause. To activate the bequest, Vera must formally request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving the document. Failure to act within that window would render this will void and revert control to the 2015 testament. 72 hours. The deadline fell at 8:30 p.m. on May 18th. Thomas Whitby was waiting by the coat check when she emerged from the service corridor. She gave you a deadline, she said. She gave you permission. His voice was precise, unhurried. Your grandmother knew herself well enough to know she'd raised a daughter who would spend unlimited time talking herself out of this. The deadline isn't a punishment. It's a commitment device. It says, you don't have to be certain. You just have to move. He handed her a second card with a handwritten number. Call me tomorrow morning. We'll draft the board petition together. Through the ballroom doors, she could see her father still on stage, still performing. Her mother circulating through the room, accepting congratulations as though she'd authored them herself. If Vera did this, she would destroy what remained of every family relationship she still pretended to have. Harrison would never forgive her. Celeste would call it a betrayal. The relatives at table 31 would have something to say at every gathering for the next decade. But if she stayed silent, if she accepted the check and left and became exactly what they'd always named her, she would carry their verdict for the rest of her life. Not because it was true. Because she'd chosen not to fight it. Miss Ashford. Whitby's voice was quiet but clear behind her. She spent 3 years building toward this moment. The only question is whether you trust what she saw in you. Vera looked at the will in her hands. At the signature of the woman who'd held her under Christmas tables and taught her to read systems instead of sentences. I'll call you in the morning, she said. We're filing for that meeting. Whitby allowed himself something that was almost a smile. She said you would. That night, back in her Queens apartment while her roommates slept, Vera finally opened the walnut box. Inside, a handwritten letter on ivory personal stationery. A document dated 1965 with an official seal. And a USB drive, clearly added years later, modern and incongruous among the aged paper. She read the letter first. My dearest Vera, if you're reading this, Thomas has done his part, and your father has done exactly what I feared. I'm sorry I couldn't shield you while I was living. I can protect you now. The enclosed document is the original founding agreement from 1965. Your father has never seen it. It establishes that founder-class shares carry voting rights that cannot be diluted or transferred without unanimous board consent. The USB contains something else. In 2018, Harrison proposed a resolution to reduce my voting share from 51% to 10%. His stated rationale was that I was too old to understand modern business operations. The board rejected the motion by 2 votes. I cast one of them. I never forgot what he attempted. And I never forgave him for the way he used you to justify it, as though dismissing your capabilities somehow proved I had lost mine. Use this wisely, Vera. Not for revenge. For justice. All my love. Always. Grandma Rosalind. She plugged the USB into her laptop. 1 file. Board meeting minutes, March 2018. PDF. Her father's attempt to strip his own mother of everything she'd built. Time-stamped. Documented. Witnessed by 11 board members. The next morning, Vera called Audrey Simmons. Audrey answered on the second ring, voice carrying the warm roughness of someone who'd built her own empire and hadn't lost her sense of humor doing it. Vera Ashford. I've been waiting for this call. You knew about the will. Rosalind told me 3 years ago, right before she passed. She and I developed half the Brooklyn waterfront together in the 70s. She talked about you constantly. A brief pause. She also told me what your father tried to do in 2018. I was one of the 2 votes that stopped him. Vera exhaled. Then you know what I'm about to ask. You need board signatures on a petition for an emergency meeting. 3 minimum. I'm already 1. Papers shuffled in the background. Harrison's management style has generated enemies he doesn't know about, because they've been too cautious to say so out loud. They just need someone to go first. A pause. David Chen and Patricia Flores. They've both been on the receiving end of his temper in closed sessions. I'll make some calls. Audrey. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're sitting at that table. The petition will be ready tonight. Board meeting request, May 18th, 10 a.m., Ashford Tower, 38th floor. Harrison found out about the board meeting at 4 p.m. the following day. Vera knew this because Celeste called her 40 minutes later, her composure stripped down to its studs. What did you do? Vera was at her desk in the copy room, sorting papers with deliberate calm. I don't know what you mean. Dad just received notice of an emergency board meeting, requested by Audrey Simmons and 2 other directors. Silence like a held breath. Audrey hasn't initiated anything in 15 years. What did you do, Vera? Maybe she has concerns about the direction of the company. Don't play games with me. Celeste's voice fractured. If you're trying to humiliate us, trying to make some kind of... I'm doing my job, Celeste. Same as I always have. The line went dead. 20 minutes later, Harrison walked past the copy room toward his office. He didn't look at Vera. He never did. But the slam of his door shook the windows. Through the wall, his voice. Margaret is managing at best. We'll address whatever concerns they've invented and be done before noon. I'm not worried. A pause. Vera. Come on, Miranda. She struggles to send a calendar invite. She's not a threat to anyone. For the first time in 28 years, being underestimated felt like protection. That night, Vera prepared. She printed 3 certified copies of the will. Downloaded the 2018 board minutes as backup to 2 separate devices. Wrote a brief statement. No accusations, just evidence presented in order. Thomas Whitby confirmed he'd attend as authenticating counsel. Audrey sent a text at 11 p.m. Petition filed. See you tomorrow. She'd be proud. Vera barely slept. But the thing keeping her awake wasn't dread. May 18th, 2024. 9:45 a.m. Ashford Tower lobby. She stepped off the elevator onto the 38th floor. Marble. Floor-to-ceiling glass. The architecture of institutional intimidation. She was wearing a gray blazer borrowed from her roommate, slightly too wide in the shoulders, carrying a leather portfolio she'd found at a thrift store for $12. The guard at the boardroom door looked up. Name: Vera Ashford. He checked his tablet, frowned. You're not on the attendee list. I'm an employee with business before the board. Ma'am, this is a restricted session. I can't. Is there a problem here? Celeste. Impeccable in a navy power suit, heels precise on the marble, Hermes scarf folded at her throat. She looked at Vera with an expression that mixed confusion with the first edges of alarm. Vera, what are you doing up here? I have a presentation for the board. A presentation. Celeste's voice caught the edge of a laugh. About what, exactly? You manage the supply closet. The nature of the presentation is confidential. Harrison appeared at the corridor's far end, flanked by two senior executives. He saw Vera and his expression collapsed into something flat and cold. Go back downstairs, Vera. This doesn't involve you. Actually, a voice from inside the boardroom. It does. Audrey Simmons appeared in the doorway. 73 years old. Silver-haired. The kind of composed that doesn't need to announce itself. I invited her. She has standing to address this board. Audrey's eyes moved calmly to Harrison. Let her in. Harrison's jaw tightened. He looked at Vera the way he always had, like she was a problem he'd almost solved. Fine. Let her speak. We'll see how long it takes. Celeste caught Vera's eyes and mouthed two words. Stop this. Vera walked through the door. The room was an oval of polished walnut and leather chairs. 12 board members. Portraits of company leadership on every wall, and there, above the fireplace, Rosalind's painted portrait, her eyes calm and watchful from above the room she'd created. Harrison sat at the head. Celeste positioned herself at his right, not yet a board member but present as inheritor designate. Vera was directed to a chair at the far end, the least powerful position at the table. Thomas Whitby sat in the corner with his briefcase. He met her eyes and gave one brief nod. Board Chair Robert Quinlan, silver-haired and careful, called the meeting to order. Audrey Simmons spoke first, brief, controlled, and yielded the floor to Vera. 350 guests had applauded at the hotel 3 nights ago. 12 people waited in silence now. Vera stood. Thank you for your time. What I'm about to present may be unexpected. I ask only that you examine the evidence before forming a conclusion. She drew the will from her portfolio. Harrison exhaled loudly. A performance of boredom. Vera didn't look at him. She'd barely begun when her father raised his hand. Robert, before we waste anyone's time, I want to provide some context. He rose slowly, buttoned his jacket. Vera is my daughter, and I love her. But she's not qualified to address this board on any matter of substance. She processes information differently than most professionals. She's never held a strategic role. She has no background in law, finance, or operations. He glanced at Celeste, who completed the thought. Vera has dyslexia, Celeste offered, her voice wrapped in performative sympathy. We've always tried to accommodate her, but there are some challenges that effort alone can't bridge. Several board members shifted in their seats. What we're witnessing, Harrison continued, his tone gentling into something almost paternal, is a young woman acting out in response to recent family announcements. Sibling dynamics are... Mr. Ashford. Robert Quinlan's voice carried unexpected authority. Miss Ashford requested this time. She's entitled to use it. You'll have opportunity to respond. Harrison sat. His eyes promised Vera that she would regret every word she said next. Celeste mouthed again, You're humiliating yourself. Vera looked at both of them, her father, her sister, and something shifted inside her. Not anger. Something colder. Cleaner. The understanding that they weren't trying to protect the company, or the family, or even themselves. They were trying to protect a story. The story where she was nothing. She would not let them keep telling it. Thank you, Mr. Quinlan. She placed the document on the table. I won't be addressing my reading ability today. I'll be addressing this. Silence. This is the last will and testament of Rosalind Catherine Ashford, founder of this company, notarized September 14, 2019. Harrison's face lost its color entirely. My mother's will was completed in 2015. I have documentation. You have her previous will. Vera kept her voice level. Factual. Under New York estates law, a subsequent valid document automatically supersedes all prior testamentary instruments. She slid the original to Robert Quinlan. Mr. Whitby, would you confirm the document's authenticity for the record? Thomas Whitby rose from the corner. Thomas Whitby, senior partner at Whitby and Associates. I served as Rosalind Ashford's personal attorney from 2009 until her death in 2021. This will was executed in my presence on September 14, 2019. It was witnessed by 2 independent notaries. The original is held in escrow at a private banking institution. Robert Quinlan studied the pages. His expression changed slowly, like weather moving in. This will bequeaths 51% of Ashford Realty Group shares. He looked up. To you, Miss Ashford. A sound moved around the table. Not words, just breath, collectively held. That's a forgery, Celeste said. But the certainty had drained from her voice. I'd caution against allegations of fraud without supporting evidence, Whitby said, his tone pleasant and immovable. Our firm's reputation spans 43 years. Harrison slammed one hand on the table. My mother was ill. She was vulnerable. That attorney clearly. Perhaps, Vera said, you'd like to explain this. She pressed play on the recording. Her father's voice filled the boardroom. Sharp and certain, from 6 years ago, Rosalind is 81 years old. She no longer understands modern business operations. I'm moving to reduce her voting rights to 10%. The recording ended. What followed was a silence so complete it had texture. That was a private session, Harrison said. His voice had changed. It was smaller now. She attended that session, Vera said. She recorded it. As was her right as the majority shareholder your resolution was designed to remove. She opened her portfolio to the second document. March 14, 2018. Board Resolution 2018-209. Proposed by Harrison Ashford. Motion to reduce Rosalind Ashford's voting shares from 51% to 10% on grounds that the founder was no longer capable of sound business judgment. Vera looked up. The resolution failed by 2 votes. My grandmother's and Audrey Simmons's. Audrey, across the table, held Harrison's gaze steadily. Said nothing. This is ancient, Harrison began. It is evidence, Vera said. Evidence that my grandmother was entirely mentally capable in 2018 when that vote occurred, which makes it directly relevant to the validity of a will she signed 14 months later, a will written in the knowledge that her own son had attempted to strip her of everything she'd built. Robert Quinlan set down the document. He removed his glasses. Does anyone at this table have documentation contradicting what's been presented? Silence. Harrison's mouth moved. Nothing came. Celeste stared at the walnut surface of the table as though it contained an answer. Richard Holbrook, who hadn't spoken yet, leaned toward Quinlan. Robert, I think we need to recess and have legal review the documentation independently. Agreed. 15 minutes. The 15 minutes became 50. The board's counsel spent it on the phone with Whitby and Associates, the notary registry, and the county courthouse records office. Vera sat alone at her end of the table and drank a glass of water that Thomas Whitby set in front of her without comment. Audrey patted her shoulder once as she passed. Harrison and Celeste argued in the corner in hushed but increasingly fraying whispers. When everyone reconvened, the board's counsel spoke quietly in Robert Quinlan's ear before taking his seat. Quinlan looked at his notes, looked at Vera, looked at Harrison. Legal counsel has independently verified the following. The will presented today is valid and binding under New York state law. It supersedes the 2015 testament in its entirety. Effective immediately, Vera Louise Ashford holds a 51% majority interest in Ashford Realty Group. A pause. As majority shareholder, she has the right to bring forward any motions she considers necessary. Robert Quinlan looked at her. Miss Ashford, do you have motions to propose? Vera stood. Harrison was already on his feet. Robert, this entire proceeding. Mr. Ashford, sit down. He sat. He looked, for the first time, like someone who had always known this room could turn on him. Vera looked around the table. 12 people who, 90 minutes ago, had never considered her capable of completing a sentence in this building. They waited for her to take something, to claim her damage, to retaliate. She thought about what her grandmother would want. I'm not proposing to remove Harrison Ashford from his position. Celeste's head snapped up. Even Audrey looked surprised. What I'm proposing, Vera continued, is a confidence vote. The board will determine whether Harrison Ashford retains their professional confidence as CEO. If the majority votes no confidence, he resigns. If the majority votes confidence, I commit not to interfere in operational leadership during my tenure as majority shareholder. She let that settle. If he has the board's trust, this vote should take 30 seconds. If he doesn't, then that's information this company deserves to act on. This is theater, Celeste said, but her voice had gone hollow. You're turning a family dispute into. This is a governance procedure, Vera said. The same procedure our founding bylaws have authorized for 40 years. The same procedure your grandmother wrote into them. Robert Quinlan held Vera's gaze for a moment. Something in his expression recalibrated. Is there a second? Seconded. Audrey Simmons. Immediate. No hesitation. We'll vote. All members expressing confidence in Harrison Ashford as CEO, raise your hand. 4 hands. His allies. Men whose board appointments had come through his recommendations. All members expressing no confidence. 7 hands. Quinlan counted once. Counted again. Set down his pen. The motion carries, 7-4, with 1 abstention. Mr. Ashford. Quinlan turned to face him. The board has voted no confidence. Per Section 12 of the company bylaws, you have 30 days to tender your formal resignation. Harrison didn't speak. He stood. He looked at Vera, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in either of their lives, and she saw something in his face she'd never expected. Not fury. Not contempt. Recognition. The specific and terrible recognition of a man who has underestimated someone so completely, for so long, that he'd handed them every tool they needed without ever noticing. He walked out. The door closed with barely a sound. Vera understood something about herself in the moments that followed. She didn't feel victorious. She felt something more complicated, the hollow ache of someone who just cut a rope they'd spent their whole life hoping to climb. Harrison caught her in the private hallway outside the boardroom. Diane was with him. Someone must have called her during the recess. Her makeup had smudged, her eyes red-rimmed. What you just did in there, Harrison started. Harrison. Diane touched his arm. Not here. She just dismantled 20 years of. I didn't dismantle anything, Vera said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. I presented what was already true. Grandma Rosalind saw who you were in 2018 when you tried to take everything she built. She didn't forget, and she made sure it was documented. She was manipulated by that attorney. She was protecting herself from her own son. And protecting me. Vera held her ground. You didn't lose today because I betrayed you. You lost because you betrayed her. And you spent 20 years telling me I was worthless to justify it. Diane stepped forward, and something about her face had changed. The performance had dropped and what was underneath was fragile. Vera, sweetheart, we were trying to shield you. We didn't want to put impossible pressure on you when you were already struggling. You didn't shield me. The words had been waiting decades. You erased me. Every holiday, every conversation, every announcement where you celebrated Celeste and treated my presence as something slightly embarrassing, that wasn't protection. That was deciding I wasn't worth the effort. Vera looked at her mother. I spent 28 years trying to earn my way into this family. I'm done earning. Harrison reached out and gripped her arm. This isn't over. We'll contest that will in court. She pulled free. You'll lose. Because Rosalind planned for that, too. She planned for everything, including you. The elevator arrived. She stepped in. Her mother called her name once. The doors closed. Vera leaned against the steel wall and finally, for the first time in as long as she could remember, breathed without apology. The adrenaline drained slowly as the elevator descended. What replaced it wasn't triumph. It was grief, the specific, clean grief of someone who has finally stopped hoping for something they were never going to receive. She'd spent 28 years waiting for her parents to see her. The waiting was done now. She'd ended it herself. The lobby. Afternoon light. Manhattan noise. Thomas Whitby was waiting near the exit. That was, he began, then searched for a word that fit. Exactly what she hoped for. What happens now? The board will want to meet with you. Transition planning. Your formal role going forward. He fell into step beside her. You'll need to decide what your relationship with the company looks like. I know. But not today. She pushed through the revolving door and the city received her. Noise, light, spring air. Today I'm just Vera Ashford. Not a shareholder. Not a symbol. Just, she looked back at the tower bearing her family's name, 40 floors of glass and history. Just myself. May 19th. 2024. Harrison signed his resignation letter at 4 p.m. Vera learned about it through an email from Robert Quinlan. The board had appointed him interim CEO while conducting a permanent leadership search. Additionally, the board was formally offering Vera a position, strategic advisor with full access to major decisions, no operational obligations, full compensation. She forwarded it to Thomas Whitby before responding. His reply arrived within the hour. Fair terms. No buried conditions. Congratulations, Vera. An all-staff email went to every Ashford Realty Group employee that evening. Harrison would step down effective June 15th. Vera Ashford would join the board as strategic advisor in her capacity as majority shareholder. The company thanked Harrison for his years of service. Vera's phone flooded with messages. Colleagues who'd shared hallways with her for 2 years and never learned her last name suddenly wanted to reconnect. She ignored most of them, but one message stopped her. From Marguerite Santos, an executive assistant who'd been with the company since 1988, who'd worked directly under Rosalind in the early years. Vera, your grandmother kept a photograph of you on her desk. Not Celeste. You. She used to say you saw things that other people walked right past. I never understood what she meant. I think I do now. Vera saved it. Some things don't need to come from family to matter. Sometimes that's the point. 3 weeks later, the business press covered the story. Founder's granddaughter takes control at Ashford Realty Group. The article was careful with names, but Manhattan real estate circles are small. 3 major investment partners requested meetings, with Vera specifically, not with the interim CEO, not with the board. After an hour-long conversation with each, 2 confirmed they'd maintain their relationships with the company. One said quietly, "Rosalind built something real here. We've had reservations about the direction for years. It's good to see someone who actually understands what she created." The social fallout rippled outward from Harrison and Diane. Prior engagements, health concerns, scheduling conflicts. The family name had always opened doors. Now it arrived with an asterisk. Vera didn't celebrate their isolation. But she didn't mourn it, either. Audrey called on a Saturday morning. "How are you holding up?" "I genuinely don't know yet. Ask me in 6 months." Audrey laughed warmly. Rosalind would have handled it the same way, you know. The confidence vote instead of direct removal. The mercy instead of the sword. She paused. She always said that choosing mercy when you could choose otherwise, that was the ultimate demonstration of real power. Vera thought about that long after the call ended. Mercy wasn't weakness. Mercy was what power looked like when it wasn't afraid. June 2024. Diane called. "Just us," she said. "Can we talk?" They met at a coffee shop in Midtown. Neutral. Diane was already there when Vera arrived, looking older than she remembered, the careful surface worn thin. She held a cup she hadn't touched. "I know I don't deserve this conversation," she said. "But thank you for coming." "What do you want, Mom?" "To apologize. For all of it. For what I said, what I didn't say, what I permitted, what I told myself to avoid feeling guilty." "Are you apologizing because you're sorry or because everything changed?" A flinch. The question hung between them. "Both," Diane finally said. "I'm ashamed to admit that. But both." She exhaled. "I convinced myself that keeping pressure off you was the same as protecting you. It wasn't. I was protecting myself from the discomfort of standing up to your father. You let him diminish me in public over and over for 20 years. You never said a word in my defense." "I know. Not once. I know, Vera." Her voice broke. "I know. I can't undo it. But I don't want to lose you entirely. I know I have no right to ask that. But I needed to try." Vera looked at this woman who had braided her hair at age 7 and forgotten her birthday at age 25, and somewhere between those 2 moments had stopped choosing her. She studied her face for a long time. "I can't pretend the last 20 years were something other than what they were," she said. "But I'm willing to try building something honest. Starting from nothing. From right now." Diane nodded. She couldn't speak. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a door slightly open. That was enough for now. August. Miranda called while Vera was walking through Central Park. She almost let it go to voicemail. They met on a bench near the fountain. The heat pressed down like a physical thing. Miranda looked different. The flawless composure she'd worn their whole lives had developed real cracks. Dark circles. Hair pulled back without thought. "I've been in therapy," she said. 3 times a week, since May. "Is it helping?" "It's brutal." A short, humorless laugh. "Turns out being the golden child is its own kind of prison. Dad needed me to be perfect. Every achievement just became the new baseline for the next requirement." She stared at the water. "And the way they treated you, I told myself it wasn't my business. That it was just how the family worked. That I couldn't protect you without becoming a target myself." You couldn't. I don't know. I never tried. She looked at Vera directly. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth I've finally been willing to say out loud. Her voice faltered. I see you now, Vera. Clearly. And I'm sorry I didn't look sooner. They sat in silence. Two women who'd grown up in the same house as strangers, learning each other at 30. I'm not interested in being enemies, Vera said eventually. But I'm also not going back to what we had, which was nothing real. If we start over, we start from scratch. Completely. Miranda's eyes filled. I'd want that. It wasn't the sisterhood Vera had needed as a child. But maybe it could become something true. That, she thought, was worth more. November 2024. Vera moved into her own apartment in Brooklyn Heights. 1 bedroom. Pre-war building. A view of the bridge her grandmother had walked across to reach her first office in 1965. The rent was more than she'd ever paid. She could afford it now. Her new title at Ashford Realty Group, Director of Sustainable Development, a division she'd proposed, focused on green building standards, environmental impact frameworks, the kind of long-horizon thinking Rosalind had always believed in. Her salary, $185,000 annually, plus dividends from her shares. Harrison called occasionally. Brief, careful conversations about weather, real estate trends, nothing real. They both understood the terms. Diane and Vera met for lunch every few weeks. It was awkward sometimes. It was honest always. That was something it had never been before. Celeste and Vera had coffee on weekend mornings when their schedules allowed. They were learning each other, the person underneath the role, the fear underneath the performance. Neither of them pretended the past was acceptable. But they were building something, slowly, that neither of them had ever had, actual knowledge of who the other person was. On the wall of her apartment, Vera had hung a copy of her grandmother's portrait. The same image that had watched over the boardroom for 40 years. In the evenings, when the light came through at a particular angle, it almost looked like Rosalind was smiling. You did it, Grandma. You gave me the pieces. I just had to trust myself enough to use them. 6 months before, Vera Ashford had been invisible in her own family's story, a footnote, a source of mild embarrassment, the one they'd explained away for 2 decades. Now she was writing her own version. Here's what she understood now that she hadn't at 27. Rosalind hadn't left her 51% because she was more deserving than Celeste. She'd left it to her because she'd watched, with clear eyes, as Vera spent 20 years remaining kind in a house that punished kindness. She'd watched her adapt, create, persevere, not because it was easy, but because she had no other option. Dyslexia had made her read slower. It had also made her patient, precise, attentive to structure in ways that people who moved quickly through the world rarely developed. The same quality that made her an embarrassment at dinner parties had made her the only person in the building who understood what she was looking at when she held those documents in her hands. Harrison measured worth by credentials, by performance, by the ability to project confidence in rooms designed for people like him. Rosalind measured worth by something quieter and more permanent, what you chose to do when no one was watching, and how you treated the people who couldn't give you anything back. And now, for the first time, Vera got to apply her own measure. Not her father's, not her sister's, not any stranger's opinion of who she should have been. Her own. If you've ever been the one they overlooked, the one who adapted in silence while others were celebrated, the one who kept going without anyone noticing, I want you to understand something. You don't need a secret inheritance to prove your value. You never did. But you do need to stop waiting for permission from people who are never going to give it. That was the real gift Rosalind left her granddaughter. Not the shares. Not the company. Not the boardroom. The permission to stop shrinking. To stop apologizing for taking up space. To stop measuring her worth in someone else's currency. And nobody, not a father, not a sister, not a family, not a history, can ever take that back.